Okay, so you know how sometimes you just get this like really weird feeling that maybe everything we think we know about like reality and stuff is completely wrong?
Mm, yeah. Like we're missing some massive piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Like, what if there are other universes out there? Other realities happening right alongside our own.
It's like that whole multiverse thing. It's pretty wild when you actually try to wrap your head around it.
Yeah, and then it's like, wait a second, what if this whole reality, the whole universe, or even the whole multiverse is actually just some kind of like crazy advanced computer simulation?
Okay, now that's just messing with my brain a little bit.
Right. You and me
Yep.
both. And that's actually what we're going to dive into today.
I love it. Sounds like a fun, light, easy topic.
Well, thankfully, our listeners sent in some really interesting excerpts from this like fictional podcast episode that actually tackles these very questions. So we've got some great material to work with.
So our mission today is to basically take these ideas, the whole multiverse thing and that simulation hypothesis as they're laid out in these excerpts, and really kind of try to unpack them. Right.
Yeah, make sense of them. And hopefully do it in a way that doesn't totally melt everyone's brains.
Exactly.
Mhm.
'Cause I think both of these concepts can be like pretty intimidating. They touch on stuff that's like really fundamental to our understanding of, who we are and what this whole existence thing is all about.
Totally. So we're going to try to pull out the key insights, like the really juicy stuff that makes you stop and go, whoa. But we'll try to do it without getting too lost in like the really technical details or anything.
Exactly. We want this to be like a conversation,
Yeah,
not a lecture.
totally.
Hmm.
So to start with, let's dive into this whole multiverse idea. Like right off the bat, the fictional podcast we're looking at starts with this incredibly vast concept. It's like, imagine our universe, as huge and ancient as it seems, right? And then imagine that it's just one little bubble in this infinite cosmic ocean of other universes.
Okay, so that's a lot to take in, right? I mean, it's been an idea that's been floating around for a while. It pops up in like philosophy, science fiction, all sorts of places.
Yeah, and it's really gained traction, though, within the world of like quantum physics. And the fictional podcast actually leans into that. Specifically, they focus on this thing called the many worlds interpretation.
Ah, yeah, Hugh Everett III, his brainchild from back in 1957.
Exactly. It's based on this idea that at the tiniest level, at the quantum level, there are multiple possible outcomes for any event. But instead of just one of those outcomes happening, while the rest kind of disappear, the many worlds interpretation suggests that all those possibilities actually happen, each one branching off and creating its own separate universe.
Right, it's like instead of a single path, reality is constantly splitting. Every single quantum event creates these diverging timelines, parallel universes, if you will, and they all exist simultaneously.
And I love the example they use in the podcast. It's so simple, but it really drives the point home. It's like, think about a moment of indecision you had today. Anything. Right. Maybe what to have for breakfast.
Sure, like you're standing in your kitchen debating between toast and cereal. In one universe, you grab the bread and pop it in the toaster, but in another, just as real universe, you pour yourself a bowl of cereal.
And it's not just breakfast, it's every decision, every little choice, every time a quantum event could go one way or another, you end up with these branching paths, and both paths, all paths, are actually being lived out, just in different realities, completely separate from each other.
And think about what that means for you personally. If this interpretation is true, there are countless versions of you out there, each one living out a slightly different version of your life based on every single decision you've ever made.
Whoa, that's heavy. Like there's a me out there who went to art school instead of, doing this.
Potentially, yeah. Another you who decided to travel the world after college. Another who married that person they met back in their 20s. Every possible path, every choice not taken, it all exists somewhere, according to the many worlds interpretation.
It's mind-blowing to think about, but then things take an even weirder turn, and that's where the simulation hypothesis comes in. Now, we're not just talking about other universes coexisting, we're talking about the idea that this reality, maybe even all those other universes, could be artificial, like some incredibly complex, hyper-realistic computer program.
Okay, so we're going full Matrix now.
Basically. And the fictional podcast lays out a thought experiment from this guy named Nick Bostrom. He's a philosopher. And he came up with this argument back in 2003.
Yeah, Bostrom's argument is pretty straightforward, really. He starts by saying, okay, let's imagine that advanced civilizations get to a point where they can run super detailed simulations of their ancestors.
Like basically creating historical video games that are so real, you can't tell the difference.
Exactly. And if civilizations reach that level of technology, It stands for reason that they wouldn't just run one simulation. They'd likely run tons of them, right?
Mm.
Like thousands, millions, maybe even an infinite number of simulations.
So then he asks, given that scenario, what are the odds that we are actually living in the original base reality versus one of the countless simulations?
And his conclusion is pretty mind-bending.
Hmm.
It's statistically far more likely that we are living in a simulation. Like if there are a billion simulations and only one base reality, the odds of us being in the real one are pretty slim.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you randomly pick a fish out of the ocean, it's way more likely to be a regular fish than the one super rare special fish.
Exactly. So Bostrom's argument doesn't prove we're in a simulation,
Yeah.
but it suggests that it's a very real possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And the podcast doesn't stop there. It goes on to present a bunch of these little clues, like weird anomalies in our world that might hint at the fact that we're living in some kind of constructed reality.
Yeah, like they talk about how the fundamental constants of physics, things like the strength of gravity, are incredibly fine-tuned for life to exist. Like even a tiny change, and the universe would be completely different, and we probably wouldn't be here.
Right. So maybe it's not just random chance that everything is perfectly balanced. Maybe it's because these constants are actually parameters set by whoever created the simulation.
And they even bring up that super weird thing in quantum mechanics, the observer effect. You know, how the act of observing a quantum particle actually changes how it
Right.
behaves.
Like reality isn't fixed until someone's looking at it. It's almost like the simulation only renders things in detail when they're being observed, which would save a ton of processing power.
Yeah, and then there's all those freaky experiences we've all had, like déjà vu, that feeling like you've already lived this exact moment before.
Yeah, or like those glitches, those weird little moments where reality seems to hiccup for a second. It's almost like a bug in the code, right? A little error in the simulation.
Definitely makes you think, doesn't it? But then the podcast gets really dark. They bring up this idea of NPCs, non-player characters. You know, like in video games, there are all these characters that populate the world, but they're not controlled by a human player. They just kind of follow their programming.
Right, so the unsettling question is, what if some of the people around us are like that?
Yeah.
What if they're not truly conscious beings, but just simulations designed to make our world feel more real?
That's creepy. It makes you really question the nature of consciousness, doesn't it? Like, how do we even know for sure that everyone else is experiencing reality the same way we are?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those ideas that makes you go down a rabbit hole pretty quickly.
Hmm.
But that whole concept of NPCs is important because it sets up the central fictional element in the latter part of the podcast, Project Mirage.
Yeah, now we're getting into the really juicy stuff. So in the podcast, Project Mirage is this super secret research group operating in the year 2161. And their whole goal is to try to prove that our reality is a simulation.
They're basically taking these simulation hypotheses from the realm of thought experiment into, a fictional but kind of plausible scientific investigation.
Right. And they go about it in this really interesting way. They develop these crazy advanced quantum entanglement algorithms and build this massive particle collider in space called the loop. It's like science fiction meets real science in a really cool way.
Yeah. And the fictional aspect allows the podcast to explore some really interesting ideas about how we might actually go about detecting a simulation.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't have the technology to do anything like Project Mirage in real life.
Right. But in the podcast, their experiments lead to a pretty stunning discovery. They find these repeating fractal patterns at the Planck scale. That's the absolute smallest scale of the universe.
And what's important about these patterns is that they're just way too orderly, too structured to have arisen randomly. They suggest a fundamental level of underlying code, like a blueprint beneath reality.
Yeah, like they find evidence of pixels, essentially, at the most basic level of reality. And that leads them to take a pretty bold step. They decide to, as they put it, poke the system.
They want to see if they can get a reaction. So they use their technology to send a targeted pulse through quantum space. It's like they're trying to send a message to whoever created the simulation.
And things get really weird after that. Gravity starts to flicker, like it's turning on and off. Global communications go haywire. And one of the scientists even sees an older version of himself outside the lab, like a glitch in the matrix.
Right. So in the podcast, the big question becomes, did their experiment cause a malfunction in the simulation? Or was it just a series of incredibly improbable coincidences? It's left deliberately ambiguous, which adds to the suspense.
And then things escalate even further. A whistleblower leaks a report from Project Mirage, and it contains this single chilling sentence. the simulation is responding.
It's a pretty terrifying thought, right?
Right.
It implies that whoever or whatever created this simulation is aware of what we're doing and is taking an active interest.
And then things get even weirder. Clocks around the world freeze for exactly 11 seconds, and people all over the planet start having the same dream. In the dream, they hear a voice saying, "You're almost ready."
It's like the simulation is sending a message, but what does it mean? It's left totally open to interpretation, which is what makes it so effective. It really makes you think about the possibilities.
Yeah, and the podcast highlights two very different ways people react to these events. Some people panic, they want to escape the simulation, but others see it as a test, maybe even a sign that humanity is being guided towards some kind of higher level of consciousness.
Right, so it raises all these profound questions about free will, destiny, and the nature of reality itself. And just when you think things can't get any weirder, this final message appears on a Mirage terminal. It reads, "The question was never whether you are real. The question is, can you wake up?"
Now that is a line that really sticks with you. It reframes the entire conversation. It's not about proving or disproving the simulation hypothesis anymore. It's about something much deeper, something about the nature of consciousness and awareness.
Exactly. It's a call to examine your own reality, your own perception. And that brings us to the central philosophical questions raised by both the multiverse theory and the simulation hypothesis. If these ideas are true, what does it actually mean for you?
Right, like, are you truly a conscious being making choices that affect countless alternate versions of yourself across the multiverse? Or are you just a complex set of algorithms, a program running its course?
Yeah, it's a lot to ponder. And the podcast makes a really important point. Even if it turned out we were all living in a simulation, the feelings we experience, the joy, the pain, the love, all of it, it would still be real to us.
Exactly. The simulation might be artificial, but our experience within it wouldn't be any less real. And the podcast even suggests another way to look at it. Maybe the universe isn't some kind of prison or a deception. Maybe it's a game.
A game with rules and challenges and goals that we're still figuring out. And maybe the point isn't to escape, but to play the game well, to learn and grow and make the most of this incredible, complex reality, whatever its true nature might be.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Maybe the real challenge isn't to determine whether we're living in a simulation or not. Maybe the real challenge is to wake up, to become more aware of ourselves, our choices, and the impact we have on the world around us.
To stop questioning the nature of reality and start living it more fully, more consciously.
So stay curious, question the code, and always look beyond the veil.
Because you never know what you might find.
And that's a wrap for today's deep dive.
Until next time.